Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this streaming of our conversation around what we think India needs to do from completely rebuilding its innovation landscape. My name is Sriram. I lead the health and life sciences practice for EY in India and the global generics practice. And over the last 20 years, I have been witness to some of the remarkable transformation how Indian industry, the pharma industry, has transformed itself from being someone who was dependent on medicines to becoming a net exporter and almost like a world leader. But I think that the journey is just half begun. There's still a lot more that the Indian pharma industry needs to do, and it's already well underway. And I think it's going to be the powerhouse to watch out for in the next decade to come. And I thought I'll use this time and effort to kind of understand what is it that the Indian pharma industry needs to do, what are the challenges it's facing, and what is it it's doing about it. So let me start right away. I think it's important to just step back and understand what is it that the Indian industry has achieved and why is it called the pharmacy of the world. Very simply, if you look at it, one in four medicines produced anywhere in the world, which is used anywhere in the world, has got some kind of an Indian source, either in terms of an API or a formulations. And this is no mean feat because if you look at it, just 5 decades ago, this was a country which only made 5% of its own molecules and its 5% of its own medicine requirements. It used to import 95%. From that time, which is 5% of making it in-house and 95% of imports, it's now come to a situation where over 80% or 85% of what it consumes is made in India. Beyond that, it's one of the few economies in the world where the export pharma industry is actually larger than the domestic pharma industry. And we don't even have to look far. Just in the last 20 years, that industry, which was $4 billion 20 years ago, is now a $40 billion industry. $42 billion to be precise. $21 billion being the domestic market and $21 billion being the export market. Clearly, it's a very remarkable growth story, and it's achieved some of the records in terms of being one of the largest vaccine exporters across the world for 150 plus countries. Some of the most important life-saving pediatric vaccines are made in this country, and quite often this is one of the largest contributors across the world to the pediatric vaccines. Even the many of the COVID vaccines, one of the largest production capacities of the COVID vaccine is in India. And if you look at the overall world demand, about 60% of the world's vaccine demands is from India. If you also look at the way the generic industry is actually is flourished, over 40% of all the ANDAs which are being applied for in the US today, our approvals are coming from India. And since 2017, this number has only been increasing, not reducing. And many companies now look at an Indian source as being almost a de rigueur required thing for them as part of their global manufacturing network. It also, if you look at the kind of generics demand, or 40% of the generics demand in the US, and 25% of all the medicines in the UK are coming from India. And if you look at the kind of manufacturing capacities and facilities it's put in, it has the largest number of US FDA approved facilities outside of the US. So, very clearly, from a size scale perspective, this industry has grown well. But having said that, this industry is still a lot more about volume. It is about how can you produce cheap, effective generic drugs faster, quicker, and in large volumes. What we see going forward is that this is going to change. We are now going to see the sector actually grow 3 times from where it is today. So if you thought the last 10, 20 years was remarkable, the next 10 years is going to be even more. And this $40 billion industry is likely to become a $130 billion industry in the next decade. The interesting thing is, what's made it successful so far is only going to contribute one third of the growth. The next wave of growth is going to come from novel biologics, novel drugs, NMEs, vaccines, as well as trying to produce and become far more integrated from an end to end standpoint, from having all of the APIs and KSMs and creating a completely resilient supply chain. So we believe that the Indian industry is actually finally going to grow back from being a value or a volume focused, volume driven industry to a volume and value focused. And that's going to be the key, and that's going to define the next decade. But how's it going to do this? The one way to do this is to understand that what's got you so successful so far is not going to make you successful in the future. What you have done so far and what the Indian industry has done so far is done very well in making generics. They've made it fast, right, cheap, and easy. They just made generics very, very well. That's an excellent capability. The world depends on India in terms of trying to produce these affordable medicines, and that's led to its position in the world. What they now need to do, what the Indian industry now needs to do, is move beyond that. It needs to look at the world beyond just simple generics and commodity generics to far more complex generics. Make sure there are a lot more specialty products. Make sure that you're looking at areas which are difficult to meet. Look at different forms of the formulation to make consumption easier, to make the patient end use easier, the patient experience easier. That's going to be a large part of making and changing from a volume play to a value. The second is actually leveraging in a much larger scale the global contract development and manufacturing. Often we notice that contract development and manufacturing still remains in the country of origin. US players tend to outsource to the US, UK to UK, and so on and so forth. What's important is to try and see how India can tap into this global CDMO market, get into high technology, difficult to manufacture products, and be able to establish that. And that's an important thing. The third, which is going to be the most important of these three growth elements, is creating a mark for itself as becoming a global R&D innovation hub, creating its own molecules, creating its own biologics. That's where the future is. So far, it hasn't been successful because the right ecosystem and the four or five important things that need to come together are not there. For example, the industry academia collaboration, the availability of risk capital, ability of a great regulatory infrastructure. All of these were not present. But I believe in the next 10 years that's going to change, and that's going to create a global R&D innovation hub in India. And you can already see those green shoots of growth happening. If you look at how the R&D investments that Indian companies are making, the same generic companies who have been so successful in making low cost, affordable drugs, they have actually made a very, very subtle but important change in how they spend the money. One, if you notice the graph, it's actually grown from 5% to about 8.5%. Second is a shift in what are they spending it on. They're no longer spending it only on low cost commodity generics. A lot of this money is being spent in specialty complex generics. A lot of it is being spent in biologics, biosimilars. In fact, the biosimilar approvals by region, India actually has one of the largest biosimilars approved by region outside of many of these countries, even more than the US. And you have Indian companies now coming up with indigenously developed products, whether it's for diabetes or whether it's for products which are going to have a wide range of approvals and wide range of applications. And COVID 19 has actually accelerated this need, accelerated the need for a lot of the monoclonal antibodies and biologics that are required to be able to fight the disease, to be able to prevent the disease, or to be able to create multiple options to be able to look at the after effects like cytokine storm that needs to be treated. And Indian companies have actually invested a lot of money and a lot of effort and knowledge to be able to create an ecosystem of biosimilars. There are already some 2,700 plus biotech startups in this country today, and this number is going to be expected to become about 10,000 by 2025. And according to a recent study by BIRAC, which is a biotech industry research association body, about 52 Indian companies collectively have over 200 biosimilars in the pipeline. That's a significant number, and they are likely to therefore do to biosimilars what was done to generics, being able to figure out a way to produce it much more cheaper, take it to larger masses, so that the biosimilars and biologics become far more affordable, and create options of better classes of treatment for the patient, the global patient. And I think that's where a lot of the investments are going in from an Indian company. The Indian companies are also looking at changing away from a pure play CMO and CRO. A few years ago, the whole objective of doing a CMO or CRO in India is because of availability of low cost manpower and lower cost output. And that's worked well for it, and it has become a $10 billion plus industry. What we believe is that this industry is going to continue to grow from a $10 billion to maybe a 30, $27 billion industry with a 18% CAGR. And that is going to actually come from very different ways of manufacture. It's going to come from focusing on its strengths, on the strong domestic industry, It focuses on the strengths of actually having a large talent base and being able to create more complex products and manufacturing value-based products and not just volume. And we believe that there's a huge opportunity for the CDMO and for a lot of multinational players to leverage India, not just for the low cost manpower base, but actually leverage it for its talent base and for its ability for the potential that it provides. And we see, again, examples of that already. There is one global multinational, and this is like a typical pathway that I've seen many multinationals take, which initially set up stuff in India more for looking at it as the back office, move back office operations, transactions to India because of the low cost, cheaper manpower capabilities. But slowly, and you can see that over the last 3 to 4 years, there has been a change in terms of making it an integral part of the global drug development center, be it for generics, be it for new molecules and new molecular entities and new biologics. India has now become a central hub for that particular company in its drug development journey. There are companies and there are examples out there which are publicly stated around what a Novartis is doing and what a Merck is doing in terms of creating innovation labs, in terms of creating biome hubs and collaboration centers to be able to tap into the exciting startup ecosystem of biologics and of novel innovation in India. And in my mind, that is just the tip of the iceberg. I believe the next 10 years, multinational companies and big pharma are going to use India increasingly for these kind of global capability development centers, tapping into this rich talent, creating therefore almost a virtuous cycle of ecosystem of people coming in and more graduates entering this space and thereby creating a much larger talent. And that's going to change the way the Indian industry is going to be perceived in the global markets. It's also going to change the way that India is viewed as moving away from a pure low cost location to a high value location. Having said that, everything's not rosy. There are a lot of challenges the Indian industry is facing today, and that needs to be corrected if this future has to take shape. And some of these are very clearly put. And one of the most important one is around, while there is a huge volume of talent in India today, the quality and industry readiness of that talent is still a question mark. A lot more needs to be done in terms of talent development, in terms of real life experiences, in terms of protocols, SOPs, and others to be learned before that talent is actually ready, and that's an important thing. Second is also, if I look at the entire ecosystem, the integration between industry and academia, the silos are still there. And until and unless we're able to create that virtuous cycle where there is cross collaboration between industry and academia, where people are able to use research labs for fundamental research and be able to use industrial labs to look at how do you commercialize it in a fast and effective manner, that's going to be key for us to be able to enter the next wave of innovation. And also, from a pure regulatory approval and regulatory frameworks, the country is still evolving in its current regulatory frameworks. And the government also is now focusing on investing in creating faster regulatory pathways, understanding what's required from an industry academic collaboration. Also, understand that it doesn't need to look at regulatory coming at the end of the value chain or end of the cycle, but regulatory actually has a role to play in every single step of the way in drug development. And that's where a lot of the focus has been. Hitherto, the government had not really looked too much at this sector. Now that's changing. On a post-pandemic, the amount of incentive schemes that the government has released to try to make India self-sufficient in pharma, plus also look at India actually creating a virtuous ecosystem in novel products and novel drugs. A huge amount of incentives and R&D is coming in right now. That's going to be key because that will help companies take that first push towards doing something which is a very highly risky venture and be able to use those incentives to be able to subsidize and reduce that risk burden which comes right up front and ensure that the companies are focusing on the science and focusing on getting the product right rather than worrying about where the financing is going to come from or whether they can survive the next. And so a lot of that is going to come in. And plus, an important thing is also the government is trying to figure out how to improve entirely complex world of intellectual property rights and make sure that it is able to provide and adhere to what it signed up for from a world standard. So I think the huge amount of potential, There's a massive amount of work that's happening to be able to get to that next level. And if India gets these right, it is going to be the pharma innovation hub of the future. Definitely in the next 10 years, the market to watch. Now, from that perspective, I think what's important, and I'm not going to drain this slide, is how do each of these players focus on various areas. So, one is big pharma has to really look at changing its traditional approach of using India as just as low cost location, but actually use it as an innovation hub. And the way I've seen this working is if those innovation and capability centers become an integral part, I call it verticalization of the organization. So there are some parts of the work happening in, let's say, in Boston or New England, some parts of the work happening in India, some of the parts of the work happening in Europe, and how do they, all of these kind of harmoniously work together as one global team? That's going to make a huge difference, and that's going to change the game. Interestingly enough, the world saw a lot of this collaboration happening during COVID, where it didn't matter where you were as an individual, uh, it didn't matter which time zone you were. Uh, you actually saw collaboration happening with teams far away in geography, but brought together by the power of technology. And I think that's going to be a lot more used in the world coming forward, so that you're able to fast track, crash the timelines required to drug development. I think what one of the things that also we've seen is we are questioning why does it take so long to get a new drug to market. If we could get a vaccine out in 12 months, which has never been done before, why can we not get regular drugs out, which are for life-saving illnesses, in a much faster way? Why does it have to be 10 years to get a drug to market? And that's those are important questions, and I believe we'll be part of the answers in terms of solving. And as I mentioned before, academia and research institutions have changed the way they operate today in terms of focusing on not just esoteric research or focusing on only, I would say, uh, redoing old research, but actually collaborating actively with industry and creating almost, I would say, incentives for academia to be able to do this collaboration and come up with newer products and newer research, which is then actively being IP'd out to industry. And that's going to create, again, a virtuous cycle of building in new products that are going to come in and completely new ways of treating illnesses and treating diseases. The other thing is what India is very well known for is the startups, and the startup ecosystem in India is one of the most vibrant ones. uh, Fortunately or unfortunately, most of those startup tech ecosystems happen to be in the tech space. A lot of these are tech innovations that's happening. What I now believe the future is going to be a combination of the tech and the bio coming together for creating truly novel ways of approaching disease. How do I use the data from, let's say, a continuous monitoring diabetes sensor, which doesn't just give once a day kind of numbers, but actually gives you continuous monitoring of glucose of a diabetic patient? How do I use that data to create the next diabetic, a much better one, just 10 times more effective than what is there in the market today? I think that's the kind of innovation. And India is blessed to have a great tech infrastructure and tech startup ecosystem, which I believe, married with a bio startup system, will actually come up with a far more powerful innovation hub than available in any other parts of the world today. And lastly, but not least, the government itself needs to take in and do a lot more in terms of incentivization. They've already started off, but also create a very effective policy framework and regulatory framework to encourage these industries and change the role of the regulator from being a policeman or a gatekeeper to being a facilitator and an enabler. I believe with these four things in place, we should be able to see the greatest innovation hub of the world has ever seen. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening in, and I look forward to engaging with you as you look at the rest of the CPHI and fantastic set of people that we've had. Thank you.
Good afternoon in India and good morning in UK and Europe. My name is Dr. Dinesh Dua, and I'm an executive director with a $450 million life sciences company, which is a global leader in APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, in a highly specialized antibiotic space globally, which is cephalosporins, non-penicillin G based, that is based on 7-ACA and GCLE. We've done very well, close to about 10% CAGR over the last 5 years, and we'll continue to ensure that we dominate the world. Currently, we're doing through quality, excellent manufacturing, and various other parameters of the life sciences industry. I've also been the immediate past chairman of Pharmaceutical Export Promotion Council for 3.5 years and a vice chairman for 2 years. This position reports into the Honorable Minister of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Piyush Goyal, one of the most dynamic ministers in India, and has been established over the last 20 years to help the pharmaceutical industry in India, the sunrise industry, in facilitating exports. I have 42 years of experience post my MBA, Masters of Business Administration from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, which is promoted by Harvard Business School in India, the first school of its kind in India. And I have worked in MNCs like Herbst, which is now currently, uh, Sanofi Aventis, as well as in a lot of leading Indian pharmaceutical companies as president in Jubilant Organesis Limited, president in Wockhardt Limited, president in Zydus Kerala Healthcare Limited, and executive director now in, Nectar Lifesciences Limited, which I introduced to you earlier. It's been a pleasure working with CPHI, and it'll be my endeavor to take you through my presentation about how Indian pharmaceutical industry has evolved over the last 20 years in particular. How has it become a pharmacy to the world? What is happening out there in the formulation space, both in the domestic pharmaceutical industry, which is close to about $23 billion worth, and in exports to 206 out of 211 countries as a pharmacy to the world, as I stated earlier, and what kind of is the future challenge for the Indian industry to go forwards. So now I'd like to make the presentation. The subject of my presentation is Indian global powerhouse of pharma formulations, because that's where we dominate the whole world. And Atmanirbharta, this is a vernacular Hindi word which means self-sufficiency, coined by our honorable and dynamic CEO, Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi. In case of intermediates, which is prior to the APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and key starting raw materials. Our CEO, Honorable Prime Minister of India, has stated India's pharma industry is an asset, not just for India, but for the entire world. It has played a leading role in reducing the cost of medicines in trillions of dollars, not billions, mind you, trillions of dollars all over the world, especially in case of developing countries and also developed countries in US, Europe, Japan, South Korea, which I'll walk you through. This tells you that our ambitious target until 2024 was $5 trillion economy. But unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we slipped by about 2 years. So has the entire world for that matter. And we expect that this $5 trillion economy to be number 3 biggest economy in the world will be realized hopefully by 2026. Now that COVID has come under control, 900 million people, 900 million, I repeat, have been vaccinated in India, out of which 200 plus million people have been fully vaccinated. So currently scenario in the API, KSMs, and intermediates is import dependence, particularly on our neighbor China, to mission dependence and to dominance in this space, as is the case with formulations, through chemistry, clusters, and policy reforms. And we create a vibrant Indian pharma, which is a pharmacy to the world. And there are 4 major schemes which are listed on the right hand side of the presentation. Make in India, Prime Minister's initiative for, public health for the people, Skill India, and of course, the initiative for making India self-sufficient in all respects going forwards. Now, Indian pharmaceutical industry is a huge industry, particularly in terms of volumes, currently ranked number 3 in volumes, but ranked number 9 in terms of value. So that tells you about the arbitrage which sits in there. I mean, just to give you an example, there is a particular drug which costs you $1 per pill out there in the United States, even after genericization. In India, you get it for 2 cents or 3 cents. And in that 2 to 3 cents also, you end up making a profit with excellent quality, excellent affordability. And in the rest of the world also, the pricing could be much lower than US, Europe, Japan, Korea. The reasons are pretty simple, that there the level of compliance, the kind of effort, and the production costs and quality management costs is way above the rest of the world. Not that it makes any difference to the quality, but this is basically to ensure that we comply with whatever is required for the regulated markets, highly regulated markets of the world. We are, as a country, are the champion of affordable healthcare in the world, made immunization program, increasing life expectancy both in India and developing world. And Indian domestic market is currently valued, as I said earlier, at about US dollar $23 billion. Add to that 25 or $24 billion worth of exports, makes it almost close to $50 billion, growing at about 16% year on year. What has happened in India in a minuscule manner, and I think the government focused through the production linked incentive schemes, which have been rolled out a year ago, PLI 1, that is number one, and PLI 2, which is basically just about a couple of months ago, with a incentive, production linked incentive as we call it, of close to about $6 billion, and that's a huge number for that matter. Now look at what Indian pharmaceutical industry has contributed to the public health improvement and economic growth of India. 36% lower disability adjusted life years. It's increased dramatically. The number that I've captured is 2016. 100% eradication of polio. 95% lower treatment costs of life-threatening diseases such as hepatitis C and leukemia. 2.7 million jobs created, skilled jobs, knowledgeable jobs created over the last 1 decade. US $10 billion being added to the national exchequer through foreign exchange, and $2 billion of inflow into the country through foreign direct investment. In terms of further contribution in better health outcomes, 60% of the global vaccine production comes out of India. Serum Institute of India, which is right at the forefront of COVID vaccine production, as in collaboration with AstraZeneca and Oxford, right, is the largest in the world, and is become the largest even in COVID. And then there are two other Indian companies who, of their own, have produced COVID vaccines. Zydus Cadila Healthcare, where I was a president for a couple of years, and of course Bharat Biotech, very dear friend of ours. Even for the children now, very soon, both Zydus and Bharat would be qualifying in the next couple of months as well. Youngsters below 18 and even younger children. 90% of the WHO demand for measles vaccine is met with from India. 40 to 70% of DPT and BCG is sourced out of India. 25% of the medicines available in UK are made in India. Every second capsule, every second tablet, every second suspension, and every second injectable intravenous, intramuscular, transdermal, or whatever is sourced from India in the generic space. I'm a very proud Indian saying all these numbers. And 37% of the AIDS patients in Africa have been treated with anti-AIDS treatment from India. Vision 2030. Now, this is something which has been submitted to Niti Aayog, which is basically Planning Commission reporting indirectly to the Honorable Prime Minister. We aspire from the current level of $47 billion, even if we grow only at about 7 to 8%, to about $80 to $90 billion. And if we grow at a modest 11 to 12% as against 16%, which we are currently growing at over the last couple of years, it'll go up to a staggering $120 to $130 billion, pairing up with China as the second largest market in the world, because China is currently pegged at $128 billion, has slowed down because of COVID. Now, with this share of the wallet, share of the market, and this is value, mind you, if you convert it into volumes, it's significantly higher. And that is where the arbitrage sits in terms of the valuation or the pricing of the medicines in India and rest of the world, developing and emerging markets and underdeveloped markets vis-a-vis the highly regulated and affluent nations of the world. And that is very evident even from the COVID-19 vaccine pricing as well. Now, currently, the value share of India in the global generic market is 4.4%. Will go up by 2030 to 8.4% of the total market. And my sense is that in this case, COVID works to our advantage because we've supplied anything and everything in the chemical space in now vaccine space, which is going to start exporting from the current month to ensure that we go even up to 10% going forwards. There are a lot of opportunities which exist for India to move forwards. There's patent cliff, which is coming through until 24. 250 billion worth of drugs are going to go off patent. Biosimilars, India is making waves through vaccines as well as through biologics, but currently only biosimilars, not the innovation space. However, having said that, in the vaccine space, we are getting into the innovation space as well, which will encourage the biosimilars and biological innovation space going forwards in consonance and active cooperation of the institutes of great eminence. Now, this broadly tells you how is the Chinese API KSM and intermediate space is out there. How did the Chinese industry go forwards and grow fastly? It was completely facilitated by the Chinese government. They created huge amount of supply situation by way of pharmaceutical parks of the size of 10,000 hectares, and invited the industry to come and set up shop there and incentivize the collaboration between the academia and industry. And there was no looking back, with the result that they became behemoths of the keys, starting raw materials, APIs, and intermediates in about last 20 years time, and there's no looking back from there. Category-wise exports, formulations are of course 73%, bulk drugs are 18%, the rest of the vaccines at about 4% or thereabouts. And overall, that's how we stand in terms of $24 billion worth of exports to 206 out of 211 countries. Now, Indian domestic pharma has been growing rapidly, as I said earlier, and this is how it's kind of moved forwards over the last 6 years or thereabouts at a weighted average 12% growth. Indian pharma industry from a level of $28 billion in 2015 has grown up to $47 billion as of last year. Basically, the trend is anti-infectives, cardiovascular, etc., going down to vitamins and vaccines. Now, what are the trends coming out of these statistics that I've presented? Trend one, specialty drugs have prescription share of only 2%, but the market share is 50%. So that tells you, in oncology, viral hepatitis, multiple sclerosis, autoimmune diseases, which cost between US 100,000 to 200,000 per patient per year. That is where the value is being derived in a big way. 90% of the generics currently are for generics in the United States for the generic space. Top pharma drugs, basically the top 10 in the world are biologics. And in terms of therapy areas, oncology is currently valued at $126 billion. And that's really huge, growing very, very rapidly all over the world. And that's the case in India as well. Trend five is that in our country, we have price control called NLEM, National List of Essential Medicines. 47% of the drugs are based on imported APIs, and that's a source of concern. APIs like paracetamol, metformin, ranitidine, amoxicillin, ampicillin, you name it, the top 10 drugs. Indian domestic industry is vulnerably dependent to the extent of about 95%. And that is where, during COVID, it was demonstrated clearly. This is the list of what I said earlier. It's being imported from China. And if there is any problem with China, economical, geographical, or otherwise, the robust industry in domestic will stand to suffer. Currently, we import 5.2 billion worth of APIs, intermediates, and KSMs from China, which is a source of great worry. And our pricing from China is arm twisting us big time, is relatively higher than what is the pricing or price increase for that matter is there in the regulated market like Europe and US and Japan as well. Now, if the current trend continues unabated, it's so frightening to know that by around 2032, we would end up importing $163 billion worth of APIs, intermediates, solvents, KSMs, etc. And that's why the government of India sprang into action during COVID to ensure that we get out of it as soon as possible. I'll skip the slide because this again tells you about the numbers in terms of what kind of dependence do we have. Indian exports of API, as opposed to the formulation where we're growing so rapidly, have been degrowing, if you see this number, except US and Japan, where we've been growing, but the rest of the world, EU, etc., we are degrowing because China is cannibalizing our sources. You look at China, as I said earlier, this table tells you that China is ahead of us in Europe and rest of the world countries, and not, sort of uh, going ahead of us when it comes to US and Japan because of lack of documentation and the ability. So therefore, what's the solution? The solution is that you get into chemistries which hitherto we've not been doing. These are fluorination, chlorination. Excuse me. All of this is listed out here: fluorination, green chemistry, asymmetric, continuous process flow chemistry, and of course, a whole host of fermentation in a big way. Economy, efficiency, and environment. E3 is the guru mantra, in terms of making sure that we get there to where we belong. So all of these are action areas for Government of India as well as the industry to make sure. And in order to do that, what you need to do is to create an amalgam between industry and academia. 95% of the innovation, both in formulations, biologics, as well as in API intermediates and KSMs, has come through academia. Now, if they can do it, why can't we do it? We have fantastic, globally acclaimed patents, awards, and institutions are sitting on a mountain of such patents, which needs to be taken out and worked along with the industry. And I'm very happy to inform you that Government of India is incentivizing it in a big way. We need to form clusters like China, of course, for which PLI schemes have been promoted very recently. So challenges are APIs, medical devices, where again 90% dependence is on imports, not on, as much on China as on Western countries as well as Taiwan. And R&D skilling, and we need to focus on innovation rather than renovation. That's the way forward. Now, in bulk drugs, as I had stated earlier, that we are importing for the domestic industry up to about 90 odd percent, and for exports close to about 20% we did. Because in exports, Chinese manufacturers are not able to give you the kind of documentation. They are not able to face the stringent audits of highly regulated markets, and therefore our dependence is not as much as. So before the moiety, as technically we say, is formed, we import whatever we have to import, and then when the moiety, the active ingredient moiety, which works to alleviate the issues and problems, we do it ourselves. We have the documentation ready. India has the largest number of US FDA approved plants. India has the largest number of ANDAs as well as drug master files, both for Europe as well as for US. And similar situation exists out there in Japan, since Japan is focusing in a very, very large way to leverage generics from India rather than anywhere else. Strategy towards self-sufficient Bharat, Atmanirbhar is self-sufficiency. And that is basically when government came forward during COVID, early on in the COVID scenario, where everything skyrocketed because of lockdown by about 40% from China, and supply chain disruption was so intense and huge. And Chinese got addicted to it, sorry to say that, and they continue to increase the prices, and therefore a lot of initiatives were taken by the government along with industry. And the Department of Pharmaceuticals, which is a part of Ministry of Chemical and Fertilizers, came up with two schemes, predominantly bulk drugs and medical devices, along with three pharma parks and four medical devices parks to facilitate the country towards self-sufficiency. Now here, close to about almost around $1 billion worth of API production-linked incentive scheme was offered to the industry. 41 KSMs and drug intermediates and APIs, which were totally being imported from China, were identified, and incentive ranging from 10% to about 20%, I beg your pardon, to 10% and then 5% in certain cases was offered, and the industry lapped it up big time. The rate of incentive, the fermentation-based products, chemically synthesized products, has been, as I said, 20%, 15%, 15, 5%, and 10% in case of chemically synthesized molecules. And these are some of the molecules which are being currently imported from China, which have been given a $1 billion worth of incentive. This has been really, really welcomed by the industry. And in about 5 years' time, we expect 50% self-sufficiency. And in about another 5 years, that's one full decade, we would be in a position to export a lot of these molecules and give China a run for their money. In terms of PLI2, the focus is more on innovation rather than innovation. Objectives were creation of global champions, increased production of high-value products, greater penetration of the global pharmaceutical value chains, and greater pharmaceutical product diversification, boosting the sector resilience, access, and affordability, and very importantly, encourage for greater R&D spending. Here again, 1.5 billion worth of incentive was given in 4 categories, which are listed out here. And it was given to multinationals for innovation in terms of close to about $700 million worth of turnover, and another about, let's say, close to about $50 billion in Group C, where SMEs are also involved. And Group B was anything between, let's say, $60 million to about uh, $700 million. Group B was categorized, and different sets of incentivization were provided. Our request to the government of India going forward is that R&D should be incentivized. The stimulus must be given. Tax exemptions as available in the other countries must be ensured are given to the industry to continue to walk along with the institutions to walk on the path of innovation from current renovation in the generic space. So innovation, incubation, mentoring, skill building, parks and clusters are basically 5 initiatives which the government has to do. Whatever I've listed out here, I'm very happy to inform you that most of it has been accepted by the government and has been taken forwards through PLI schemes and other policy announcements which have been given, except that R&D, drug repurposing, and dossier licensing is something which needs to be done. So to sum it up all, what we're saying is enhance the collaboration between institutes, academia, and industry. Institutes apply for the tenders, and nodal agency disburses the payment based on milestones, and industry, inquires about technology, and a nodal agency has to be created, which makes sure that it leverages both the institute and industry and creates a friendly, collaborative, cohesive environment. So there are 3 verticals in which India has to move forwards in the innovation space: R&D, the pharma through the organizations, that's the private sector predominantly, and of course the government, which plays a facilitating role. In terms of workflow for innovation, it's all listed out here. What you see in red here are the milestone payments. See, institutions in India currently are based on grants by the government. Now, gone are the days when you would live on government doles or the taxpayers' money. So you got to earn and then you got to burn. That's simple as that. You got to make sure that you earn enough of money to make sure that you make your footprints to the industry, give the proof of concept to them, let them understand, mutually agree to milestone payments. And there are at least about 50 examples where a lot of institutions in India, AIMS, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, NIPERs, we have so many NIPERs in our country, which are, repository of huge amount of innovation. So we need to move forwards in that direction very quickly. So there is this science forum known as Ski Forum, which will do and facilitate all of this going forwards. And therefore, I have tremendous amount of hope that India, which has become the pharmacy of the world, has taken giant leaps in biosimilar space also, will gradually transition towards making sure that we step into innovation in a sizable way. If we can do it in generic space, why can't we do it in NCE, new chemical entity? And also, if we can do it in biosimilars, monoclonal antibodies, there are at least about 50 institutions and industry partners who are working in the space of biologicals, and biosimilars are very different from generics. You cannot use the same expression system. So in a way, it is a new initiative as compared to what is existing. Only thing is your characterization should be perfect and your clinical trial should be strictly in line with what the innovator has done. And that's been achieved in India. If you can achieve that in biosimilars, I'm more than confident that you can do it in the new biological space also. Having proven your might in vaccines in hardly about a year to year and a half, yeah, vaccine development is as complicated as a new biological entity. And if you've done that, why can't you do it in biological space? So I'll just stop here and summarize that I think India is at the cusp, or it's at a inflection point where it's got to move forwards from the current generic space dominance to a sizable situation in the innovation space, both in the chemical entities and largely in the biologic and vaccine scenario. And with this, thank you, CPHI, for giving me this opportunity to showcase India to you. Thank you, and have a great day ahead.